Hello and welcome to another episode of Kitchen Pedagogy. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about 5 ways to build confidence. One of the things I observe when I watch lessons is that typically, if you scan the room while a teacher's teaching, you notice that the students who contribute the most, who seem to get most airtime in a lesson, are the ones who are already the most confident. They're more likely to volunteer an answer. When they give answers, they tend to talk for longer. And teachers, because you're looking for affirmation and clarity in the thinking, have a bias towards asking the students who they think they're going to get good answers from. And that's something to check for in itself. But what it does is it leaves students with the least confidence in and around those students. And sometimes it just feels to them that the lesson is not really geared towards them. They're just sort of hanging on in there. And that's not building their confidence. So we all know that confidence is a huge factor in learning, in motivation. So we've got to work really hard to make sure students feel good about the learning process. And that means all of them. So how do we build confidence, especially when we've got a mixed class? Well, I think there are 5 ways. One of them is to be strongly focused on consolidation. And there are lots of different opportunities for that. To restate things, to go over them again, to make sure we've got the main idea. And I see teachers do that really well, where they think, okay, we've aired this idea, we've discussed it, lots of ideas have been floated, let's just nail that down. So the main thing is A, B, and then C. So let's just check that. This happens, so this happens, and then this happens. And it feels consolidatory. We're kind of locking things down a bit. The method is you do this first, then this, and then you go to that. Can we all see that? Here's another example. Let's check with this example. Over it, and over it, and over it. And so lessons have this strongly consolidatory feel that we're reinforcing the ideas we've already explained one more time to make sure, and checking for understanding so students are sort of relaying that back to you to make sure that's in their head, not just in yours. So that's the first thing. How often do you consolidate and make the learning absolutely explicit and check for understanding? The second way is to engage students in explicit rehearsal. You're not just hoping that they've picked ideas up that they then have to remember later. So this needs to involve everybody. So things like pair share are really useful for this, where you get all students to turn to their partner and just run through the key arguments, the key explanation that you've just given, to explain to each other why that answer is right and that one is wrong, or to practice explaining something that you've just explained. And that is very, very powerful. And if you've got a whole class of students doing it in pairs, means they're all having a chance to do it. If a student hasn't even mentally rehearsed an idea on their own and just gone through it in their mind, it's much less likely that in a week's time when they come to some kind of retrieval practice that they can remember it, because they didn't even really rehearse it in their own head at the time. One student's really good answer over there that has been shared has automatically kind of zapped into the heads of the others. It probably won't have done. So getting students to say, right, we just had a really good explanation, let's just check, run through it for me again. And you pick another student who may be one of your less confident ones to just do that explicit rehearsal. And you make that obvious to students. We do this a lot. We rehearse, and it's explicit. We're very deliberate about it. Let's just run through that one more time and get everybody thinking. So that's the second thing. A third idea is to look at the possibility for having repeated short feedback loops. And what does that mean? For a lot of students who are struggling or finding learning harder than others, often, when you analyse what's happening, the tasks are simply too long. So they're doing a longish task. The class is going up for different rates, and then the teacher tries to pull everyone back to try to give feedback. But there's so many different things that have been going on, it's quite difficult to focus the feedback on a certain aspect of learning. And so it's often the students who are the slowest who get the least immediate response, because there's been a lot more that's happened that perhaps they haven't even got onto yet. If you can create very tight feedback loops, which everyone does, you can then you can do them repeatedly. So for example, before you get everyone to go off and write a whole story or essay or a speech or a full explanation, you just get them to do their, say, 3-point plan or their first sentence, their opening line. And in doing that, you can then say, right, let's have a look at your line, and then everyone has to show you or discuss it or check against an answer. And then you see how well they've done on that very short task. And then you say, right, let's do it again, have another go. Let's do it even better, just that very first bit. And then we look at those and then we say, right, let's do it even better still. And you've got a quick iterative improvement cycle, which those students then think, okay, yeah, better, better, better. And that sort of sets them off. So that's a really good thing to look for. Have you actually set the task to be too long to give meaningful feedback in a short enough time period? And you don't have to do it for every activity, but some of the activities need to have this short feedback loop feel so the students can check very quickly how well they're doing and improve straight away, and then they can build their confidence. The fourth idea is about scaffolding the details. It's giving students the tools, the language to engage in the wider concepts. And often they're sort of to do with the way you express ideas or the way you organise ideas. So, for example, a good one I've seen recently is just getting students to list 3 ideas. And when they're in a pair or an unstructured group or just on their own, they're not really sure how many ideas they're supposed to have. And if you just say, I saw a teacher do this where they had 3 ideas to come up with, and on the board it just said firstly, secondly, and finally. And that was a structure which they might later use in writing. So when the students gave an answer, the teacher was sort of pointing at the scaffold and they had to say firstly, secondly, and finally, and they had to list their 3 points. And it was making them say 3 points, which they had to think of, and also gave them a language to express them in an order. And that was a neat scaffold for that detailed bit of thinking. Another example could be just simply advantages and disadvantages, and you have to come up with 1 or 2 or 3 of each. So the students have to say, an advantage of such and such is this, whereas a disadvantage is this. And it's giving them the structure to express that idea. Without that scaffold, they might kind of have this sense of the idea, but not quite sure how to communicate it, and it holds them back. And it's that simple way in, it's sort of opening the door to the discussion, and some other students are already more naturally confident with that. So it feels a bit artificial possibly, but you're not just taking their sort of half-formed answers, you're giving them a way to put things in. And it could also be sort of really precise phrases, words to use, structures in writing, which help the students contribute to a wider discussion. So scaffold the details is important. It's not just scaffold strips for, say, a whole essay. It's the kind of phrase level, it's the word level details, which often are the things they need. And the last example is to do with retrieval practice, where I have a thing about this. Retrieval practice can sometimes feel to students like it's out of their control. It's random, it's arbitrary. They're suddenly being quizzed on something that they did in the past and had no way of knowing that was coming up. And the teacher's sort of saying, well, you should know this. But if you're not confident in some knowledge, there's a lot of knowledge often you're not confident with, and it can feel like you're watching University Challenge, that some questions are just coming out of the ether and you're supposed to know them. But because you don't know them very often, you feel sort of helpless with it. If you want to build students' confidence with retrieval practice, you've got to make them feel that they can succeed and do really well at it. So you've got to do that. You've got to sort of do things like tell them the questions in advance. Sometimes, literally, these are the questions you're going to be asked, and tell them even when they're going to be asked so they can prepare to do them well. And then you do that quiz, and the students get the experience of getting the answers right on their own in a test situation. But because they knew the questions, they have a good chance of doing that right. Now that teaches them a process. If they don't get the answers right, even though they knew the questions, you can tell there's all sorts of things going wrong with their study process. Other things are just being really clear about the knowledge. That here's a set of information you should know. You should know those definitions, those dates, those facts, those equations. And I'm going to test you on them next week. So here's the process you could use, using a knowledge organizer and self-quizzing or flashcards, whatever it is. Teach them the method and then say, right, we're going to quiz just on that knowledge next week. So there are 10 things to know. Let's see how many you can remember, that type of thing. And so the students learn that it's within their control to study. That's the key thing. And then they start building confidence around that, yes, I can learn, I can study, I can remember things, and then you can make it more difficult for them. So those are 5 ideas. Consolidation, explicit rehearsal, repeated feedback loops, scaffolding the details, and agency built into the retrieval practice.